From a young age, Isabella Carter was immersed in the rhythm of Carter & Sons Construction, the Charlotte-based company founded by her father. While other children colored animals and castles in art class, Isabella colored on the backs of old blueprints beneath her father's oak desk. The clatter of keyboards, the hum of printers, and the aroma of coffee blended into the soundtrack of her childhood. By age 8, she could distinguish between a floor plan and an elevation drawing. By 12, she was answering phones at the reception desk, organizing schedules, and charming clients with a precocious professionalism. Whenever someone complimented her poise, her father Richard Carter would beam and say, "She's got my business sense. Someday, this will all be hers." That promise became the foundation of Isabella's life. Unlike her older sister Savannah, who spent her 20s pursuing art and backpacking across Europe, Isabella took a straightforward, disciplined path. She majored in business administration with a minor in construction management. When her peers chased careers in New York or San Francisco, she turned down 3 prestigious offers and returned to Charlotte, stepping into Carter & Sons the Monday after graduation. And from that day on, she never stopped. The next 10 years were a relentless blur of work. Isabella arrived at dawn and often left long after sunset. During busy seasons, she slept on the office couch. She didn't just manage projects, she restructured the company's outdated accounting system, digitized all paper records, and introduced modern project management tools that slashed delays by 40%. Under her leadership as operations director, the company's revenue doubled. Richard may have held the CEO title, but everyone in the building knew who really ran the show: Isabella. But the cost was steep. 2 long-term relationships ended because she always chose client emergencies over date nights. Her apartment, where she'd lived for 5 years, served more as a place to shower and nap than a home. Friends stopped inviting her on weekend getaways because the answer was always, "I'm on deadline." She even missed her college best friend's wedding, all because of the Daniels Plaza deal, the company's biggest contract to date. Still, Isabella had no regrets. Every hour worked, every sacrifice made was an investment in her future, a future she believed would include owning Carter & Sons. Her father had promised it. And every time she passed a construction site bearing the family logo, she felt it pride, purpose, and destiny. What she didn't know was that not all promises are meant to be kept. Savannah Carter returned on a quiet spring afternoon. No dramatic announcements, no heavy luggage, just a soft leather bag slung over her shoulder and that dreamy, distant look in her eyes. After years of drifting between art galleries from Paris to Portland, the family's wandering daughter appeared on her parents' front porch, as if she'd never left. Isabella was as usual at the office when the call came. Her mother Margaret sounded elated. "Savannah's home, Isabella." "She just got out of a cab. Can you come by tonight?" The news gave Isabella pause. She had never truly expected Savannah to settle down. Her sister had always been the embodiment of freedom midnight dinners along the Italian coast, a series of artsy apartments in Barcelona, love affairs with painters and architects. Savannah's world was vibrant and chaotic. Isabella's was structured, efficient, and color-coded. That evening, over their first family dinner in nearly 4 years, Isabella noticed something had shifted. Savannah's laugh was softer now, and her eyes misted slightly as she spoke about a recent breakup with a Belgian gallery owner. She said she was tired of running and wanted to find something more grounded. Their parents, especially Margaret, were overjoyed. Their dream of having both daughters close working side by side seemed suddenly possible. Within weeks, Savannah began visiting Carter & Sons more frequently. At first, it was just to observe, then to offer ideas for marketing. Isabella didn't object. She was the first to admit that visual creativity wasn't her strength, and Savannah's suggestions redesigning the logo, refreshing the company brochure, were surprisingly well received by clients. Even Richard, their father, began to praise Savannah during meetings. But what shocked Isabella was how quickly Savannah was handed an official title, creative director. No formal job description, no KPI metrics, no HR process. One morning, Isabella arrived to find a shiny nameplate on a side office door, Savannah Carter, Creative Director. Savannah worked about 25 hours a week, typically arriving after 10 a.m. and leaving by 4 p.m. She took long lunches and sometimes brought her dog to the office. But she had a natural charm, and clients warmed to her immediately. Margaret beamed with pride at every Sunday dinner, delighted that both her daughters were finally in the same place. Isabella tried to feel happy too. She wasn't jealous, or at least that's what she told herself. But when strategic meetings started happening without her, when her father and Savannah began having closed-door conversations, and when her mother quietly changed the subject whenever she mentioned growth plans, a subtle unease crept in. She didn't say anything. She didn't want to shatter the family harmony they'd only just regained. But deep down, Isabella began to sense something was shifting and not in her favor. And soon, that shift would no longer be subtle. That Friday afternoon began like any other. Isabella was searching for the original contract of the Daniels Plaza project, one of the company's largest deals, to double-check a billing discrepancy. Thanks to the office-wide document reorganization that Savannah had recently suggested, the once pristine filing system had devolved into chaos. Her fingers traced the drawer labeled legal documents. Confidential. Maybe the contract had been misfiled, but what caught her eye instead was a thick manila folder clearly marked ownership transfer, Carter and Sons Construction. A flicker of unease passed through her. Probably just an old record from when Grandpa passed the business to Dad, she told herself. But as she slid the file out and opened it, her breath caught. Date March 15th this year. Only 6 months ago. Her eyes scanned the pages. At first, the legal language blurred together, but then certain phrases hit her with brutal clarity. Transfers 75% ownership to Savannah Carter, remaining 25% retained by Richard and Margaret Carter. Isabella's name was nowhere. The blood drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she flipped through each page, hoping, pleading for an explanation. A note, a clause, a footnote, anything. But the documents were clear and cold. She wasn't in them. Suddenly, the office lights felt too bright, the air too thin. At that moment, Diane, the longtime office manager and someone who'd known Isabella since childhood, appeared in the doorway. Her face shifted from concern to quiet guilt as she saw the folder. "You knew," Isabella whispered, barely audible. "Did you know about this?" Diane didn't speak at first. She just stared at her sensible flats. Her silence was answer enough. "Your father said he'd tell you when the time was right," she finally murmured. The right time, Isabella's voice cracked. "It's been 6 months, Diane, and everyone knew except me." She didn't wait for a response. Still clutching the folder, she pushed past Diane, ignoring the unfinished reports on her desk. She didn't take her laptop, her calendar, or her office badge. None of it mattered now. The drive home blurred. A red light ran. A delivery truck nearly clipped her. All she could hear was her father's voice echoing in her head. "Someday, this will all be yours." A promise, a lie. Her apartment was dim when she arrived. She didn't bother with the lights. She collapsed onto her couch, still holding the folder like it might vanish if she let go. Her gaze fixed on the bare wall where family photos should have hung. What did I do wrong? Was I not enough? The questions circled like vultures, tearing at the edges of her pride. 10 years? 10 years of devotion erased by a single decision she wasn't even worthy to be told about. In the silence, she reached for her phone and dialed the one person she trusted most. "Chelsea, it's me. I need to talk." The call with Chelsea ended in tears and silence. Her best friend had shown up in under 30 minutes, wrapping Isabella in a hug as if she'd just lost someone, and in a way she had. After a decade of giving her all to Carter and Sons, Isabella felt more abandoned than ever. She didn't leave her apartment that weekend. No laptop, no email. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls and messages, all of which she ignored. Her mother's voice trembled with worry. Savannah insisted, "This wasn't my fault." Her father kept it short and cold, "You need to be professional." But what cut Isabella deepest wasn't what they said it was, what they didn't. No one apologized. No one admitted betrayal. They weren't afraid of losing her. They were afraid of losing what she provided. By Sunday evening, 5:58 p.m. blinked on the oven clock, the usual time Isabella would leave for their weekly family dinner. For 2 years, that time had marked a ritual of routine. But tonight, instead of taking her keys, she sat in front of her mirror in a crisp blouse and blazer, staring at herself like she was saying goodbye to a version of who she'd once been. Monday morning, 5:30 a.m. Her alarm buzzed as it had for 10 years. But for the first time, Isabella didn't rise. She lay still, listening. Then quietly she reached over and turned it off. She didn't go to work. There was no formal leave request, no company-wide memo, no exit statement. She simply stepped away silently, leaving them to face the chaos they'd sown and the cracks she'd spent a decade patching over. In the days that followed, the messages shifted from concern to desperation. "Where did you save the Daniels contract? The Westridge client is asking about pricing. Savannah can't find the last file." She read them, but didn't reply. This was her first lesson in detachment, in letting go of the rope she'd tied herself to for so long. By the 4th day, her father called. His voice, usually composed, now carried urgency. "This is childish, Isabella. You have responsibilities to your team, to your clients. Don't let personal drama ruin professional standards." She paused, calm and quiet. "Savannah owns the company," she said. "Let her handle it." And then she hung up. Sunday night arrived as it always did, but this time Isabella didn't come as a daughter returning for a family meal. She came as someone who had been cast out carrying proof of betrayal in her purse, the ownership transfer file. The Carter home looked as peaceful as ever. The brick facade was tidy, kitchen windows glowed with warmth. Margaret stirred the pot roast, Isabella's favorite. Savannah was laughing while setting the table, and Richard sat in his usual armchair reading project documents as if nothing had unraveled. Isabella stepped inside with a polite, hollow smile. No one asked where she had been all week. No one acknowledged that she hadn't shown up at work. Instead, they greeted her with a rehearsed normalcy, as if silence could rewrite the truth. "Perfect timing," her mother beamed. "Dinner's almost ready. I've got the table," Savannah added, smiling like always. "We've got great news about the Westridge project," Richard noted. Isabella nodded silently. She hadn't come to pretend. She'd come to end the performance. Throughout dinner, she barely touched her food. The family discussed marketing strategies, client meetings, and Savannah's creative rebranding. Isabella listened but remained silent, a guest at her own family's table. Then as Richard stood to leave, Isabella's voice sliced through the conversation. "Actually, I need to talk to all of you. Together." Silence fell like a curtain. Margaret froze mid-reach. Savannah's smile flickered. Richard slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Isabella pulled the folder from her purse and placed it firmly in the center of the table. The sound of paper on wood rang louder than anything spoken. "When were you going to tell me?" she asked. Her voice was calm, too calm. They stared at the folder like it had materialized from thin air. Richard's face hardened into the mask he wore during negotiations. Margaret clutched her pearls. Savannah avoided eye contact, her gaze fixed on her napkin. "Where did you find that?" Richard asked, his voice low. "Does it matter?" Isabella replied. "Did any of you think I deserved to know?" Her mother reached for her hand, but Isabella pulled back. "The right time to tell me would have been before you signed it, not 6 months after." Richard leaned into his well-worn CEO tone. "It was a strategic decision. Savannah brings a fresh perspective to the company." "And I don't." Isabella's voice rose. 10 years of sacrifice, doubled revenue, and you reward me with silence." Savannah interjected softly. Isabella, it wasn't like that." "Dad approached me, and you accepted without asking why I wasn't included in those meetings." Isabella cut her off. No one answered. Finally, she said, her voice sharp and final. "If Savannah owns the company, let her run it. I quit. Effective immediately." She stood, letting her gaze fall over the stunned faces of the people she used to call home, then turned and walked out the door. The next morning, when her alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just as it had every day for the past decade, Isabella didn't move. She had no reason to. No meetings, no emails piling up, no deadlines looming. The apartment was unnervingly quiet, as if the world itself had paused, waiting to see what she'd do next. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling until the first slivers of sunlight slipped through the blinds. By now, she would have made her coffee, checked her email-printed agendas for the 8 a.m. briefing. Today, the coffee pot was cold, the laptop untouched. She opened her closet and stared at the neatly ironed shirts and polished pumps, then closed it. Instead, she pulled on an old college hoodie and leggings, clothes she normally reserved for the rare hours of weekend freedom. Her apartment felt foreign. After 5 years living there, it had never really been hers. It was a rest stop, a place to shower, sleep a few hours, and return to the office. No family photos, no plants, no traces of personal identity. A life built around one thing: work. "If I'm not part of the company, then who am I?" The question echoed in her mind like a voice in a cavern, unanswered. She stepped onto her balcony with a mug of cold coffee and watched the street below. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't part of the hustle. No title, no meetings, no deliverables. The freedom she had once dreamed of now felt disorienting, even hollow. It wasn't liberation, it was loss. She checked her phone. No texts from her father, no calls from her mother, not a word since the dinner. In that moment, she realized something: they were waiting for her to return, just like always, because that's how it had always gone. They pushed her out and expected her to come back and clean up the mess, but this time she wasn't coming back. At noon, she called Charles Whitman, her mentor from college, a man known for being tough but fair, who once told her real worth isn't in promises. It's in whether people keep them. "Charles, do you have a minute?" she asked when he picked up. "For you always." "What's going on?" she told him. Slowly, calmly, more than she thought she could. About Savannah. The 75% ownership. The 6 months of silence. Charles didn't interrupt. When she finished, he spoke with quiet certainty. "It's time to protect yourself, Isabella." On the 6th day after leaving Carter and Sons, Isabella's personal phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Years of instinct as a professional made her tense for a moment. "Isabella Carter." The voice on the other end was deep, composed, and slightly sharp. "Yes, speaking. This is Gregory Daniels, CEO of Daniels Development. I've been told you're no longer with Carter and Sons. What's going on?" Isabella hesitated. Gregory was her largest client. The Daniels Plaza project alone was worth over $12 million. She had handled every clause of that deal, solved issue after issue with his engineers. They weren't close, but he had always respected her. "I'm currently on an extended leave," she replied carefully. "Savannah, my sister, is coordinating with your team now. Yes, he said, annoyance creeping into his tone. She's trying. But honestly, it's a mess. Specs are inconsistent, replies are slow. I need someone who knows the project inside and out, and that's you. Isabella's chest tightened. A part of her wanted to leap up, grab her laptop, and jump back into action, but another part stronger now kept her grounded. Mr. Daniels, I appreciate your trust, she said, but at the moment I no longer have a role at Carter & Sons. So, are you looking elsewhere, he asked. I'm exploring my options. There was a pause. Then Gregory spoke again, slow but firm. If you join another firm, call me. I'll transfer the entire project to wherever you go. My loyalty isn't to a company name, it's to the person who gets the job done. The words landed with surprising weight. For years, Isabella had believed her value was tied to the Carter & Sons brand. But now someone outside her family was acknowledging her worth, not because she fought for it, but because she had quietly stepped away. She sat in silence after the call. No bitterness, no rage, just clarity. Real value doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it speaks loudest. In your absence. Gregory Daniels wasn't the only one. Within 48 hours, a flurry of messages flooded Isabella's inbox. Westridge wanted clarification on budget allocations. Landmark Group asked for the quarterly project updates. They weren't reaching out to Savannah. They weren't contacting the new executive team. They were looking for her. Then on day 7, her father called. Isabella, he said without preamble, without warmth. Daniels is threatening to pull the contract. $12 million. He refuses to work with Savannah. You need to come back. His voice, normally cool, controlled, cracked with urgency. Richard Carter, the man who always projected calm authority, now sounded unsteady. But Isabella didn't feel pressure. Not like before. There was no adrenaline, no compulsion to fix things, only a strange, calm detachment. Let Savannah handle it, she said evenly. This isn't a game, Isabella, he snapped. This is our family business. Your grandfather's legacy. Do you really think this is a joke? She exhaled slowly. That legacy. You already gave it to someone else. I'm just honoring that decision. There was a pause. Then Richard's tone shifted, not angry now, but pleading. Without you, we're going to lose everything. You know that. She didn't argue. It was true. But for the first time, she didn't feel responsible for saving it. Then maybe it's time the company learns to stand on the legs you chose, she replied. 27 minutes later, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw her father, disheveled, tie askew, holding a thick folder. Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped into her apartment and began pacing the living room like a caged animal. Do you have any idea what you're doing? He barked. Anderson, Westridge, Landmark, they're all wavering. If we lose them, Carter & Sons could collapse. Isabella leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Maybe it's time you ask yourself why they're wavering. Richard stopped. His eyes a mix of frustration and something like hurt locked onto hers. What do you want? He finally asked. She met his gaze, calm and unwavering. 40% ownership, operational control, voting power, and humane working hours. The words, sharp and measured, landed like a contract being laid on the table. For the first time, Richard Carter saw not a compliant daughter, but an equal. And he realized he was no longer holding the stronger hand. The formal meeting was set for Wednesday afternoon at a quiet riverside restaurant, a neutral location private enough for real discussion, yet public enough to temper emotions. Isabella arrived right on time, dressed like a negotiator, not a daughter betrayed. At the table sat her father, Richard, her mother, Margaret Savannah, and Harold Pierce, the longtime family attorney. The air was tight, as though everyone was holding their breath before the storm broke. Thank you for coming, Richard began, voice low but measured. We've reviewed your proposal. He continued, nodding toward Harold, who placed a draft agreement on the table. Before Isabella could respond, Savannah spoke, hands clasped nervously in front of her. "I want to say something first," she said quietly. "You're right, Isabella. I'm not equipped to handle this. I thought I could learn on the job, but I'm completely in over my head." Isabella blinked. A confession. No excuses. Savannah continued. "I didn't know Dad had promised the company to you. I just wanted to be seen as capable after years of being the family screw-up." For the first time, they looked at each other not as rivals, but as two women shaped and scarred by the same flawed system of silence and favoritism. Richard cleared his throat. "I should have told you the truth earlier, but what matters now is finding a way to save the company." Isabella scanned the table. "Then my terms stand. I'm not coming back as an employee. I return only as an equal. 40% ownership. Executive authority, voting rights." Richard's brow furrowed. "Savannah already holds 75%. We can't just—" "I'm willing to transfer 35% to her," Savannah interjected, stunning the room. "I never wanted to own the company outright. I just wanted to belong." The tone shifted. Tension eased. The meeting moved from confrontation to negotiation. Over the next hour, a framework took shape. Isabella would receive 35% ownership, Savannah would retain 40%, and their parents would keep the remaining 25%. Both sisters would co-manage operations. Major decisions required two of the three parties' approval. Maximum working hours would be contractually defined. There were no more daughters obeying parents. Only professionals setting terms not based on bloodline, but on merit. When the letter of intent was signed, the meal ended in a quiet sense of relief. Everyone at the table knew this wasn't just a business agreement, it was the reshaping of a family dynamic. As they stood to leave, Savannah stepped beside Isabella. "Do you have a minute?" she asked softly. They walked out onto the patio overlooking the river where the golden light of dusk shimmered on the water. For the first time in years, there was no tension between them, no competition in their posture, no resentment in their tone. Just two women once defined by a last name, now trying to see each other clearly. "I'm sorry," Savannah said, eyes on the horizon. "Not just for the company, but for believing I had to take something instead of build something with you." Isabella was silent, taken aback by the sincerity. "He told me," Savannah continued, "that you were too valuable in operations to move into ownership, that the company needed you in your place." I believed him, and I stayed silent when I saw you being pushed aside. "Because you were afraid of losing the one thing you just got," Isabella replied. There was no accusation in her voice, just understanding. Savannah nodded. "I was afraid of being the outsider again." They stood there for a moment. "We never really talked, did we?" Isabella said with a tired smile. "Not really," Savannah admitted. "We just switched roles, the achiever and the drifter." "And now?" Savannah turned toward her, voice steady. "Now I want to be your partner. Not above, not beneath. Just beside." For the first time, Isabella didn't see Savannah as a threat. She saw someone who could walk beside her. The following week felt like a quiet restart. Together, the sisters met with department heads, outlined their responsibilities, and redrew the lines that had once blurred or clashed. Savannah took the lead on marketing, client relations, and creative direction. Isabella focused on operations, finance, and long-term strategy. The differences that once divided them had become their greatest asset. Even the staff noticed. The atmosphere shifted. The tension that once clung to every meeting dissolved. Work days no longer stretched into 9 p.m. evenings, and for the first time in Carter & Sons history, the company wasn't centered on one person, but on two people. Walking forward together. 1 month after the revised agreement, Carter & Sons looked nothing like its former self, and neither did Isabella Carter. The executive office had been redesigned. Gone were the isolated corner offices. In their place stood a shared workspace with 2 desks side by side. On the wall hung a new photo, not just of Richard Carter alone, but of all 4 original founders, a quiet nod to both history and transition. Isabella began her days at 8 a.m., not 6. She no longer brought cold leftovers for lunch. Instead, she often stepped out with Savannah or the staff. Evenings weren't spent burning the midnight oil. She left at closing time no longer carrying the weight of the entire business on her back. "You've changed, Chelsea," her longtime friend and head of HR remarked during a casual meeting. Isabella smiled. "I think the company doesn't need my sacrifice anymore. It needs my balanced presence." Savannah had evolved too. Once known for polished speeches and rehearsed charm, she began listening. Where she once tried to impress, she now asked for input and shared decisions. The sisters remained different, but they had grown to respect that difference. Under their co-leadership, the company restructured workflows, became streamlined projects, no longer hinged on name reputation, but on team competency. Weekly open forums were introduced where employees could offer feedback directly to the leadership. A fresh atmosphere, new ways of working, but the biggest transformation happened within the people themselves. Isabella, who once tied her worth to overwork and her father's approval, was now redefining herself by her principles, not her position. She no longer worked to be seen. She worked because it was right. And ironically, when she stopped trying to prove herself, people finally began to listen. On a quiet Friday afternoon, as the office emptied out,